Today I'm working on the Willys Jeep L-head motors again. I've got to get some charging systems going because I've got a few projects that none of them have charging. Now, normally they'd use a generator. Usually a 6-volt generator for the earlier ones. The later ones had some 12-volt stuff, but 6 volts most common what I happen to have. And I'm going to run 12 volts because it's a lot easier to get accessories for and they're way cheaper. So I'm going to convert to 12 volts. I also need to get a little more amperage out because I want to be able to put in some higher draw accessories if I want to. The cheapest and easiest way to get 12 volt charging power is the good old Chevy Alternator. People put these on everything and they're cheap, they're easy to work with. They just basically you spin them and they put out power. But there's a couple things to pay attention to when you're installing one of these, particularly on one of these motors. Now the first thing is the belt. These Chevy Alternators have a pulley that's meant for a 1/2-inch belt. Now I've got 2 belts here. This is the kind of belt the alternator is meant for. This is the kind of belt the Willys is meant for. Because the Willys motors are more of a tractor engine. A lot of tractors use these wide 5/8-inch belts, and that's kind of the technology we're working with here. So the bottom pulley, the crank pulley, and the water pump pulley are all meant for this 5/8 belt. If you go to put this on a Chevy Alternator, it does that. There is no way that that is going to sit properly in there. Now you can get away with taking your 1/2-inch belt, putting that on the alternator, which works fine, but then you're sitting way down in the groove on the pulleys here and you can't transmit as much power. It's going to work fine. You really don't need a whole lot of power to run the water pump or anything like that. The most critical issue is gearing. What happens when you have a narrow belt sitting down on the pulley gets effectively smaller. Now I actually bought something, you might see right here. This is a Chevy Alternator, and this is set up for mounting on a tractor. It already has a wide pulley on it. So on this alternator, that 5/8-inch wide tractor belt fits fine. So this is the kind you want to use when you're working on one of these motors. Not only is the belt correct and engaged properly, the ratios are much better. Let me show you what I mean by that. Now this thing came with a spec and test sheet on the alternator, so I'm going to use this as an example. Now alternators are meant to spin pretty fast, and then they have to spin pretty fast in order to get any kind of charging out of them. It actually has the charging, let's see, I'll scan this in and put it as an extra page. It actually has a performance curve of how the RPM and the amperage are related. Now I bought this a little while ago. It was under 65 bucks, and that was a deal I couldn't pass up. These are still available on eBay, but they've since raised their prices. I think it's over 90 now, which I wouldn't actually pay because there are other options. One of the other options is a new pulley. This right here comes as a kit, pulley, fan. It goes right onto this alternator. This one is set up for either 5/8 or 3/4 belt. So that 5/8 belt sits in there nice. So let's compare the diameters here. This is one of the motors I tried to get running when I was reviving a whole pile of old Willys motors. It's still stuck, but it has all the accessories on the front so we can use it to mock up this system and put it on a different motor. I'm going to pop this generator off because the whole tab, the lower mounting tab, is just sheared off completely. So obviously that's never going to work. Someone hacked in a 1/4-inch bolt inside where it's supposed to be. So we're just going to pull this off and use this motor for mocking up our other alternator. And just like magic, now we have room to work. Now you can see this is the original style belt here. This uses a 5/8 wide belt, and you can see how it sits in the upper pulley. It sits nicely. Lower pulley, same thing. This is what you're supposed to have. Now I'll pop this thing off here. Now this is the 1/2-inch size belt that you'd find on a Chevy Alternator. That sits down quite a bit in that groove. Same thing with the water pump. It sits down real low. Now obviously that belt fits in the groove, and you can go ahead and drive with it. You can drive fine with one of these small belts. but the wider ones are a little bit tougher and take a little more power, and I like them. Now, here's my crank pulley, and I want to get a comparison of what this is going to spin the belt at, then figure out the RPM for the alternators. So I'm going to use the 5/8 belt for comparison. Now if you use the 1/2 inch belt that's narrower, it would sit in further on all the pulleys, so the proportion will be about the same. Let's go ahead and throw this in. For ease of math, we're just going to go to 1 decimal place. So boom, there we go. We've got 5.2 on effective diameter here. For comparison's sake, I'm going to use this curve to compare the RPM to the amperage output because I have it here. And other Chevy alternators will vary, but the basic idea of pulley size is about what you're looking at here. If we took this standard Chevy alternator and put our belt on it, we're going to end up with about a 3.4 inch effective diameter. Figuring it idling at 600 RPM, this one's going to be turning only 900 RPM when it's idling, which if we go to our curve here, that's basically 0 amps. So it's not going to charge at idle at all. We go to this alternator. Now we put this one on, we're around 2.5 inches effective diameter. So with this one, at the 600 RPM idle, it's going to be turning, what is it, a little over 1200 RPM. Now we go into our chart for that. 1200 RPM corresponds to about 20 amps. So you're going to have about 20 amps of charging on this one at idle. Now we get our 3/4 inch pulley, and this is one where the 5/8 belt even sits in the groove. Measure that. We're looking at 2.2 inches. We put this pulley on. This alternator is going to be spinning 1400 RPMs at the same idle speed, same 600 RPM on the motor. 1400 RPMs puts us somewhere around 35 amps or so. So that's charging, so this pulley will make it charge pretty decently even at idle. So basically what you're looking at comparing here is these two that are meant for the 5/8 pulley look like they'll work pretty decently most of the time, and they'll charge at idle and do what you want to do. That's just not going to work at idle. You're going to have to be revving that motor to charge at all. So we don't want to go with that. Besides the belt not fitting, it just won't work RPM wise. And these two will work out nicely. If you're doing something where you're doing a lot of idling or real low speed motor work, I'm thinking this 3/4 pulley would be the way to go. For general use, I think this one will be fine. All right, we're going to go ahead and swap out this pulley here. That does not want to go out. There we go. That's the way to do it. And I've completely destroyed this pulley. So if you want to quickly destroy your Chevy pulley, use one of these 3-jaw pullers. Try one of these bearing pullers, see what that does. Let's see how badly this goes. Yeah, I seem to be mangling the pulley a little more. There we go. Now what we have here is a thin spacer. Now this kit came with a thicker spacer, so I'm going to swap that out. Put this on and see how it lines up. That sits out pretty far. Alright, with no spacer at all, this sits kind of nice. Now remember, these things are a fan. That's actually drawing air from inside the alternator and spitting it out. So if you have too much of a gap, it's just like not having a fan shroud. So I want to get that pretty close. So I'm going to run with no spacer there, put the spacer here, see how that looks. That sticks out a bit. Let me take this spacer out, put this here. Now, I don't like that. Thinner spacer, put this on. There we have a little bit of a gap, and I like that. That looks like what's supposed to be there. Then we have the nut. So now we have the big wide pulley. So this is a 3/4 inch pulley. The fan's nice and tight there. Got a little gap between the pulley and the fan blade, so we know it's actually hitting. It's not hitting the edges of the blade, it's actually hitting inside on the shaft. So I think that'll be a good solution. Well, now we get to the fun part of how do we attach that alternator to this motor. I'm going to set these on here. So we need an alternator somewhere in this area. I'm going to use this one wire one because I already have it and it's all set up, ready to go. Now there are people who make off-the-shelf kits to bolt this alternator right to that bracket with no problems. And if you feel like spending money, they're really not that expensive, but that's the way to go. Now I'm using the belt as a rough alignment here. I'm going to figure out approximately where I need to mount this. Now the factory generator mounts on these large diameter holes here. Now what I'm looking at is this one here. I go ahead and install my alternator, put the belt in the right position, and it ends up, the edge of this hole is just about flush with the end of the tab here on the alternator. So I think if I put a flat plate right across the two, indexing off this hole side, I'll have positioned this correctly. And then on the other side, I'll just make a brace up here. Now I always use whatever I have lying around to do this kind of thing. And I was looking at this diameter of the hole. It looked familiar. I have a lot of TJ brake pedals lying around. That hole looks like just about the same size. Now, along with all these pedals, I also have a bunch of bolts that hold them on. Now they came with two different diameter bolts. One of them is this real large diameter bolt, which looks like it fits real nicely. The other thing I have is bags of bushings that are left over. You take this bushing, there's a little bit of slop there. We put that bushing in there. And now it's a real tight fit, no slop at all. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a brake pedal, cut this off, drill a hole for the alternator, cut this flush with this surface, mount it there, then maybe even take another one, put it on the other side for the other half, and put them all on this bolt with some bushings on it. And that should lock this all in nicely. Alright, got my piece made here. Gonna pop it into place. That bolt and bushing is a tight fit. That's not really going anywhere. Now I don't have anything constraining it over here, but it's gonna be pulled this way with the alternator, so I think that'll be okay. Now I want to make another one of these, and I want it exactly the same distance apart. I don't really care about what number it is, I only care that they're both the same. So I've got the two clamped together with a bolt between them both, so that hole is located the same. I'm going to use one to drill the next, so this is located the same. There. Now they're both identical. Now let's put this whole thing together and see how it fits. I'm going to pop this one in here, like that. Now let's see if an alternator fits there. That is about a perfect fit. So, we'll add a bolt through the whole thing. Line these things up a little bit. There. Now that I have this alternator rigidly mounted, I can fine-tune the alignment. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a straight edge, make sure it hits the whole pulley, and I can go from this water pump pulley over, take a measurement, this is how far off we are. Now this water pump pulley is a little wider, so you got to keep that in account. It has a bigger lip. This one has a smaller lip, so I'm going to try to adjust for that a little bit. But it looks like we're somewhere around, we need about another 1/4 inch from this one. Now you also want to check the crank pulley, and same deal, this one's got a bit of a lip on it, but yeah, looks like a 1/4 inch. Moving this pulley out a 1/4 inch will do it. Now that I have a solid measurement, I can space that alternator out the exact amount I need and get the alignment perfect. Now I've already told you that I'm a bit of a hoarder, and as a lifestyle choice, this comes in real handy a lot of the time. For example, I need an adjusting bracket on the top of this alternator. I've got a box full of them. Now none of these fit perfectly, but I think I'm going to take this one, bend it a little more, cut the end of this one, and make up something that actually goes where I want. And by having big boxes of random junk, I have all the pieces I need. A little bit of bending, a little bit of welding, got my bracket. And there's a bracket there. You can see it works nicely with the adjustment. Belt is tight, still got quite a ways to go. so I should have plenty of room to adjust this as needed. The belt alignment, I had to add one little bit of tubing to space it out a little bit. 2 washers right there to do the final adjustment there. So even with a straight edge, this looks pretty close. So I think we're going to be fine. So there we go. We got an alternator. Then the next step is to take this off this mock-up motor and put it in a real Jeep. Unfortunately, that's to wait till tomorrow because while I was working, it got a bit dark outside. So I'm going to wait till tomorrow when there's, sun, and we'll be trying it out. Well, it's the next day and we have some daylight out and a convenient Flatfender Jeep that needs a charging system. So let's install it on that. You may have seen this little red Jeep before. This is the one I did a video on where I put a motor in that has 10 cracks in the block. I stuck it together with glue and it's still running. I never actually expected it to stay running. I expected to have to pull it out pretty quickly. That's why I never bothered hooking up a charging system. But since it's still running, I might as well make it work better. Now let's take a look at what I currently have in the charging system area here. I have nothing at all. There's a couple leftover bushings from that used to have a generator. Someone used a piece of, looks like fuel line, maybe heater hose there to make the back bushing. When I ran this, I just took a belt and just shoved it over these pulleys. There's no tensioner on this at all. I've been running it for quite a while now, exactly like this. So now it's time to put in an alternator and actually tension that belt. One thing I see right off the bat, I've got an oil line coming right in this area. I may have to move that. It also appears this oil line is leaking, so I may just replace that too. Maybe. And then also my ground cable is attached to one of these bolts. I think that might clear though, so I'm going to try leaving that in place. I ran into a problem immediately. Let me show you what happened. Got everything installed here. There's no thread sticking out the end there. This somehow is different. So I grabbed the bracket from the other motor. There's about a ½ inch difference in length between these two. So this bracket that's on the motor is never going to work with this bolt. So I'm going to swap brackets for now and keep going. I've got the alternator in place now, and that oil line is right where I need to go. Like I said, it's already pretty shaky. I knew it was getting a little bad, so I already bought a new one. I'm just going to add it with a 90-degree fitting, get it out of the way, and then we should have plenty of room to move that alternator. Got the fitting on, lines rerouted, it's flexing, it's not hitting anything, and now we've got a ton of room to add that alternator. So that goes in next. That 90-degree fitting was a really good idea because it's got about a ¼ inch of clearance there. That definitely wouldn't have worked with a line going straight down, but it works beautifully now. We get a full range of motion and nothing hits, so we're good. Now I just install the belt, tighten this down, and do a little wiring. Now weirdly, this belt actually sits up a little bit on this fan pulley, and it fit perfect on the other fan pulley. The ½ inch belt sat low in that pulley, so I don't know what size that is, 9/16. I've never heard of a belt like that, but there are some oddball stuff. Then again, the person who gave this motor gave it to me because he said it was complete junk, so who knows what it is. Got it all hooked up, and I hooked up my voltmeter, so now I can actually see what happens. So there is volts. There's it with it off. Turn the ignition on. That looks like it's charging. It's running. And that is definitely charging. No problems there. Now that I have the alternator mounted in place here, I think that we need to test those mounts and make sure they're sturdy and don't, flex under use. still working great. Temperature's fine. Oil pressure's fine. After I thoroughly and scientifically tested the alternator by driving through mud puddles for the afternoon, I've determined that the charging system is working. It's still working, it's still attached, so that's a win. I'll keep doing some upgrades to this thing and show you as I go along. But in the meantime, you guys keep having fun, and I will too. We'll see you next time.